Welcome to Unified English Braille, an introduction. It's quite a doozy of an introduction, I have to admit, but hopefully by the end of it, you will feel much more confidence in learning the code and enjoy the process as you go through these videos. There are 6 videos. This one is part 1. We'll be talking about terminology, grade 1 mode, standing alone rule, and numeric mode. Those are all new concepts in UEB. This is a long session, admittedly, but I wanted to make sure that we got the groundwork laid before we went on to the other 5 parts. So let's get started. First, I am obligated to tell you that this video series was created by Julie Sumwalt, that's me, and it's made available through the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction through the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired where I work. Now that that's done, we can talk about why we're going into UEB in the first place. There might still be a feeling out there that why fix what wasn't broken? Why did we go to all of this fuss in the first place? Well, there are some big reasons why. One is, as we all know, the world is becoming more and more interconnected and smaller, as we say. So for globalization purposes, we decided to adopt Unified English Braille. This allows all of the English-speaking countries to share Braille materials. These days, we don't even have to put in a hard copy book or whatever into a box and ship it. We can just zap it by email or some other means to all around the world, and we can share materials and therefore hopefully save on expenses and allow more access to more materials so that we don't have to wait while someone else reproduces the same thing that was already available in some other country. Now you might think, okay, I'm here in the United States, what do I care what the Philippines is doing? But I'm pretty sure that places like the Philippines would be very grateful for any work that we can do here and share with them. Another reason for UEB is, again, that technology. Technology is advancing at an incredible rate, as we all know, and things like refreshable Braille displays are being used much more, and the internet. Braille readers are downloading things from the internet or other electronic devices, and those electronic devices are not human beings. They can't figure out from context what means what, and so because we only have 6 dots to work with in Braille, computers often get confused. They have to go to a default way of deciphering those 6 dots, and oftentimes, especially in, say, websites and that sort of thing, it comes out as gibberish because the computer has to pick a default way of interpreting those dots, and it probably is not going to be with computer Braille code. It's going to be in a literary sense. So for that reason, technological advances and integration so that we can go back and forth between print and Braille more easily and hopefully reduce the need for human intervention. There still will be a tremendous need for transcribers and vision teachers, don't worry, but hopefully we can lessen the load so that we can produce more. So UEB provides a one-to-one correspondence of print and Braille symbols. It's much, much more one-to-one than our previous code has been. So a dot is a dot no matter what, no matter where. A dollar sign is a dollar sign no matter what, no matter where, that sort of thing. There's very little ambiguity in trying to decipher what those 6 dots mean. Another reason for UEB is its flexibility. We'll see that in play as we go through these videos. It allows for future changes if print should ever change, and of course it is, again, at a phenomenal rate. There's always there's always new squiggles and things, symbols, and who knows what all, different meanings attached to different symbols, like the crosshatch now on Twitter, it means something else. So when we have new symbols, we can create new symbols without having to mess with the rest of the code. Before, with the old code, when we had a new symbol, we would just kind of grab whatever dots hadn't been used yet and that would often interfere with something else, and so then we would have to have a special rule about this new symbol and then have an exception to the old rule, and it just got to be a mess. And whether we were aware of what was going on or not, that's what was happening. And so it was as the print world was expanding more and more with their use of symbols and fonts and colors and who knows what all, the Braille world was not able to keep up. And we certainly don't want to hold back Braille readers because the code itself can't convey the print meaning. So we have a lot more flexibility with UEB, as we'll see. UEB replaces, of course, the old code, which was called English Braille American Edition, EBAE for short. It also, for the most part, replaces computer Braille code. For most of us, we only use computer Braille code for, say, email addresses, website URLs, directory addresses, that sort of thing. And so for that, we will not be using computer Braille code anymore. But if you're talking about computer programming, actually learning a programming code or computer studies, computer Braille code is still around. It hasn't been completely abolished. UEB does not replace Braille formats. UEB is about the code only, the 6 dots. It's nothing to do with the formats. So each country that has adopted UEB will use the same code, but they all have their own formatting rules and preferences, and they are completely, it's within their domain to decide how layout comes about in their country. But for the code, that's all over. UEB does not replace Nemeth for those areas that are using Nemeth. The United States is the only country that is using Nemeth now. Canada used to. They're not anymore. They're using UEB Math. Some places in the United States are, at least for right now, are deciding to use UEB Math, but for the areas that are using Nemeth, Nemeth still stands. Music and the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is used for linguistics. Most of us never see it, never touch it, thank goodness. But those two codes, music and IPA, are already international codes, and so UEB does not touch those. The guidelines that are now available, we have the Codebook, the Rules of Unified English Braille, 2nd edition, 2013. There's also a complementary part to that. It's still very much part of the UEB code, but it's in a separate document, and that's called UEB Guidelines for Technical Materials. And then BANA, again, that's those two documents, the Rules of Unified English Braille and Guidelines for Technical Materials, come from the International Council on English Braille. That's the international agency that oversees the national agencies. Our national agency is Braille Authority for North America, BANA for short, and they have produced guidelines for the United States and Canada, if they're using the United States and Canada, even though the United States is the only one that is using Nemeth, not Canada. So we have provisional guidance for transcription using the Nemeth code within UEB contexts for those areas that are using Nemeth. And I have to say, I prepared these documents in April, and I'm finally getting around to recording them in June. In between was May, and in May, we had the provisional guidance was actually approved by BANA, so it's no longer provisional. BANA is in the works of producing a fleshed out document that builds on this provisional guidance. So for right now, we still only have the provisional guidance. BANA has approved a document, but they haven't published it yet, this being June, as I said. Hopefully that will come out very soon. There's also provisional guidance for transcribing foreign language material in UEB, and that is also being worked on. As far as I know, it hasn't been approved yet. And also, I should backtrack a little bit. Nemeth code also has chemistry code. Chemistry code has been approved by BANA. Again, it has not been yet published, but it will be coming out very shortly. Also, I mentioned that formats is not affected. Formats is also being revised to reflect the UEB code because our current document, Braille Formats 2011, uses a lot of symbols that no longer exist in UEB, so everything had to be revamped. Not much of formatting itself has changed, but the examples and things had to reflect UEB. So that will be coming out hopefully very shortly. All the references in this series are from the Rules of Unified English Braille, 2nd edition, 2013, published by International Council on English Braille, as I said, unless stated otherwise. You can download that document in PDF form or BRF form from the ICEB website. Other resources that I highly recommend are the ABCs of UEB by Constance Ristord. That is available on BANA's website. It compares the basics of EBAE to UEB if you're transitioning. And there's also UEB Braille symbols and indicators list that came from an appendix from somewhere that nobody seems to know where from. But it's helpful to see all of the symbols and indicators. It's actually also within the back of the UEB Codebook as well. But if you just want a list, that is also available on the BANA website. The ABCs is available in PDF and BRF. The symbols list is only available in PDF. As I said, it came from somewhere. That seems uncertain, but it's only in PDF, and I thought it should be available in Braille, so I have it in Braille if you would like. It's been proofread, but not approved by any committee or anything like that, but if you'd like it in BRF format, I have that. There are other courses. These are just a few. Instruction Manual for Braille Transcribing. It's the UEB edition. That's for becoming certified as a literary transcriber. That is from the National Federation of the Blind, and you can go to their website to download that. There's also UEB Online, and that comes from Australia. It's a nice little program. It's completely digital. It's all on the computer. As I understand, it's accessible for screen readers, and it's very nice because you get immediate feedback. It comes in a bunch of different modules. Just a warning, though, because it comes from Australia, the last lesson deals with Australian formatting, and as I said, each country is able to determine their own formatting rules, and so I caution you, unless you're already well grounded in US formatting, BANA formatting, don't look at that lesson 31 or you'll get yourself really confused. If you're transitioning as a Braille reader from EBAE to UEB, Hadley has a course there, and also there's another electronic program, I guess it's an self-study electronic program. It's called UEB Bot, or I don't know how you pronounce it, to be honest, but it's spelled UEBOT, and that's an online program, and you might be interested in that as well. Okay, all of that aside, we are now talking about terminology. As I said, UEB has a lot of new terminology. Some things are simply new terms for things that we've had all along. Some things are completely different, completely new concepts. So at the risk of reading a glossary to you, I do want to at least expose you to these terms so that you'll be somewhat familiar with them by the time we discuss them in more detail later. Don't worry, we'll be talking about these in much more detail. They'll make much more sense as we go along, but again, I just want to expose you to these terms because otherwise we'll look at the rules and they won't make any sense. So, in Section 2.1 of the UEB Codebook, that's where all this terminology is from. The first one I'm going to talk about is a Braille character. A Braille character is any one of the 64 distinct patterns of 6 dots, anything that those 6 dots can produce in one cell, including the space. Then a Braille sign, or interchangeably a Braille symbol, is any one of those cells. It might be 1 cell, 2 cells, 3 cells, but the whole thing means something in Braille. For instance, a percent sign has 2 cells, so it has 2 Braille characters, but together they make a Braille sign. And Braille signs they consist of what UEB calls a root or a prefix. A root is any one of 56 Braille characters, not the 64, but 56, including the space, which is not a prefix. A prefix is any of the Braille characters, the possibilities of it within one cell for right-hand dots, or the Braille character, which looks like a number sign, but it isn't always, dots 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have roots and prefixes. Prefixes will always come first. They are the right-hand dots, or 3, 4, 5, 6. The prefix comes before a root. And the prefix and root together make, I'll backtrack a bit, a Braille sign or a Braille symbol. Some more terminology. Grade 1. Now, this is an international code, and the United States was not in on the discussion of what to call this thing when it was invented. So unfortunately, it's been called the Grade 1 mode indicator, even though well, some years ago, we stopped calling Braille Grade 1, Grade 2. Here in the United States, we started calling it uncontracted and contracted because it was getting confused with elementary grades 1 and 2. Again, we weren't in it on the discussion, so we weren't able to put a stop to it. So this has been called Grade 1, and we'll talk more about it in a bit. So we just have to put up with it. It is what it is. The Grade 1 is the meaning assigned to a Braille sign. Again, that's one or more Braille cells, Braille characters that means something. The meaning assigned to a Braille sign which would otherwise be read as a contraction or a numeral. Grade 1 mode, again, we'll talk about that. So Grade 1, we're not talking about uncontracted Braille. Grade 1 Braille is what we mean when we say uncontracted Braille. And those two terms are interchangeable. Grade 2 Braille is contracted Braille. So sometimes you'll see in the UEB Codebook Grade 1 Braille or Grade 2 Braille, and that's what they mean. A graphic sign, so we have Braille signs, and then we break it down a little bit. So graphic signs are a Braille sign that stands for a single print symbol, like the $sign, the percent sign, a quotation mark, that sort of thing. A group sign, it represents a group of letters. An indicator is something that does not exist in print. It would be something like a capital indicator, an italic indicator, a numeric indicator. Those things don't exist in print. They tell the Braille reader that something different is coming up with the next Braille cells. A letter sequence is a series of letters. And there might be something else on either side of it. There might be spaces, there might be numbers, there might be punctuation marks, but letter sequence means only letters. A symbol sequence is everything. Anything that's between two spaces, basically, is a symbol sequence. So it might be letters, it might be symbols, it might be punctuation marks, anything that has cells right next to each other until you hit a space. A passage is 3 or more of those symbol sequences. And before, in EBAE, a passage was more than 3 words. Think of an italic passage. You double italic the first word, and then at the 4th or 5th or whatever word it was, then you would put in the final italic sign. But in UEB, it's 3 or more, and so that's something we're going to have to watch out for. If it's 3 symbol sequences, it's considered a passage. A passage indicator starts that passage and indefinitely until we actually say this passage has ended. So we will see that with italics, capitalization, things like that. Standing alone is a huge concept in UEB. I would say it's even the foundational concept of UEB. So we're going to be talking about that throughout this entire series. And that's a condition to determine how Braille is read, whether it's read as a contraction or a symbol or a letter or what have you. Strong is a new concept in UEB. We'll talk about that later. It means that there are dots in both the top and bottom parts of the cell and the left and right parts of the cell all at the same time. So all 4 sides of the cell will have at least 1 dot raised to make it strong. We're not talking about alphabetic word signs at that point, though. So if we're talking about the letter T, that does have dots on the upper, lower, left and right hand parts of the cell, but it's not considered a strong contraction because it's one of those alphabetic word contractions like but, can, do. A word indicator is an indicator that sets a certain mode for a word or the next letter sequence until we say it stopped. And again, all this is going to make much more sense as we go along. I just want you to be exposed to these terms. I know it's a lot to take in right now. Don't worry if you don't understand the half of it. I just want you to hear the words, and then we'll talk about them more later on. A word sign then, we've already talked about group signs. Those were groups of letters. Word sign is a contraction which represents a complete word, like but, can, do, or part, or some. Okay, phew, we're done with terminology. Now we can talk about actual concepts. We've already talked a little bit about roots and prefixes, or prefixes and roots. Just to review, roots are any of the 56 Braille characters, including the space, which is not a prefix. Prefixes, I'll use either the right-hand dots in the cell, any combination of those that's possible, or it's the numeric indicator, or sometimes it's not the numeric indicator. I shouldn't call it the numeric indicator. It's dots 3, 4, 5, 6. For example, grouping signs in UEB all have the same root. They all have the left-hand grouping sign will be dots 1, 2, 6, and the left-hand or closing will be 3, 4, 5. Then you just add prefixes to those roots to make different kinds of grouping signs. Some examples then would be parentheses. We use a dot 5 prefix. A dot 5 is on the right hand part of the cell, so it's a prefix. We put that in front of the root of the grouping symbol. Now notice that the prefix always comes first, always comes first in UEB. If this were in the old code, EBAE for example, we tend to do things in concentric circles or in a bullseye effect because we wanted things symmetrical. To be honest, it was it appealed to our eyes rather than fingers. So it looked nice, and the UEB's way might go against the grain at first, but it actually makes much more sense, especially to the fingers, which of course is what Braille is all about. It's meant for the fingers, not the eyes, right? So let's make it easier for the Braille reader to know what's what. So we always have a prefix in front of it. So the Braille reader, when the finger encounters anything that's on the right-hand part of the cell, they know that something's coming up on, with the next cell. So there's never any confusion that dots 3, 4, 5 could be mistaken for the contraction AR because there's a dot 5 in front of it. There will never be any confusion. Also, computers then will never get confused about how to read this symbol. So we have parentheses with dot 5s in front of them, and square brackets have dots 4, 6 in front of them. Braces 4, 5, 6, angle brackets, no matter what the context is, whether it's computer directory or less than, greater than, anything. If it looks the same in print, that's what it's going to be in UEB. And that has dot 4 in front of the root grouping sign. You can also add more than one prefix. So for transcriber's note indicators, we have dot 4, then 4, 5, or 4, 6, and then the root grouping signs. So that's how it works. Another example of how this works, a little bit of punctuation now. Punctuation, by the way, has a lot of new symbols. Some have stayed the same, thank goodness. Period, quotation mark, period, question mark, exclamation mark, commas, that sort of thing. They're all the same. But there are some new things, just so you're aware. One of those, well, the hyphen is the same, and that is our root then. And if there are two hyphens that are used to represent a dash, this is kind of a side note, you can use a Braille dash. You don't have to, but you can. A Braille dash in UEB now is not going to be 2 cells of 3 6s because that means hyphen hyphen. We want it to mean a dash, so we are going to put a prefix in front of our root. The prefix is dot 6, and then our root is dots 3, 6. And if you like to think of it as a capital hyphen, go ahead, because that's how I had to remember it when I was first learning this. The underscore is used for blanks to be filled in or for actual I don't say underlining, but an underscore, say in an email address or something like that, where the line is below the baseline of text. So that would be for blanks to be filled in. The underscore, again, has the root of .36, and the prefix for an underscore is .46. The long dash is used only rarely. It's a super long dash in print. We don't use it much in Braille because we don't need to. But just for the record, it also has the root, .36, and it has two prefixes, a .5 and then a .6. We're going to follow print much more closely in UEB than we did before. And one instance of that is the ellipsis. We follow the print for the spacing and number of dots for the ellipsis. Usually there are only 3. So we put ... just like we do in print. And a dot is a dot, no matter what, no matter where in UEB. It doesn't matter if it's an ellipsis, a period, .com, 0.5, doesn't matter, a dot is a dot. So an ellipsis is 3 dots, unspaced. And if you think about it, often in print we have an ellipsis followed or preceded by a period, which is also a dot. And before we would have to try and decipher which were the ellipsis and which was the period. Now, no more. The Braille reader is going to get the same information as the print reader is, which isn't much. So if we have an ellipsis with a period on either side of it, it's just going to be 4 dots, just like it is in print. And the Braille reader will have to decipher it just like the print reader does. Another side note that we will be talking about later on in this session, I think it is, we use the grade 1 mode indicator, which is .56, when the question mark could be confused with his, because they're the same dot configuration. So we need some way of distinguishing which is which, and we'll be talking about that much later. We'll be talking about it much more later on. There are a lot of different kinds of quotation marks in UEB. UEB makes a big deal out of them. I'm not going to talk about them here in an introductory course. Most of the time, our familiar quotation marks will be just fine for what we need to do. UEB is very fond of long labels for things, however, so what we would call just a quotation mark, an opening quotation mark, UEB calls opening one cell nonspecific quotation mark. And then we have our closing one cell nonspecific quotation mark. That, again, if you study the quotation marks, it will make much more sense about why they call those things that way. But I'm not going to get into it right now. They could be double quotes, they could be single quotes, whatever. That's the nonspecific part about it. But for the most part, especially here in the United States, we usually tend to use those for double quotation marks. Our single quotation marks are pretty much the same, but again, the prefix always comes first in UEB, so we have dot. Notice that the closing single quotation mark is .6 and then .356. In the old code, EBAE, it was the other way around. So those two cells have been swapped, and just so you're aware of that situation. And just so you know, there are symbols for enlarged parentheses, brackets, and braces. And it's kind of like making them capital, just like our dash was capital hyphen. So you just put a .6 in front of those symbols. That would be for, say, a list of items that has a really huge curly bracket on one side of it. Okay, here we go with standing alone. As I said, standing alone is very, very important in UEB. And it determines how the Braille symbols are read. The basic foundation of the rule is that a letter or letter sequence, remember a string of letters, is considered to be standing alone if it is preceded and followed by a space, a hyphen, or a dash. By the end of this series, you'll be saying that as a mantra to yourself, space, hyphen, or dash. There are some other things, I don't want to say exceptions, but there are other things that don't affect standing alone. So if the things on this screen, if they come before a letter or letter sequence, that letter or letter sequence is still considered standing alone if it has a space, a hyphen, a dash on either side of it. So an apostrophe before the letter or letter sequence will not affect it, or opening symbols that are, or indicators that are paired. For instance, an opening parenthesis, square bracket or brace, an opening quotation mark, a type form indicator, not the terminator, sorry, that should be omitted, the capitals indicator, or the transcriber's note indicator. So anything that opens up and is before the letter or letter sequence, as long as there's a space, hyphen, or dash on that symbol sequence, it's still standing alone. Then if things come certain things come after this letter or letter sequence, it's still standing alone. So again, apostrophe. So you could have an apostrophe and apostrophe, and that N is still standing alone. Or if the closing symbols or indicators are come after the letter or letter sequence. Parentheses, square bracket or brace, a closing quotation mark, a closing type form indicator, which is called a terminator. A closing capitals indicator, which is called a terminator. Again, I shouldn't have said or, but it's the terminator. If it comes after the letter or letter sequence, does not affect standing alone status. Or the closing transcriber's note indicator. So standing alone status is also, this might seem like a lot, but it will make sense. Standing alone status is also not affected by common punctuation that comes after a letter or letter sequence. Those things are a comma, semicolon, colon, period, ellipsis, exclamation point, or a question mark. So to show how this all works, if those things I just listed in that previous screen come before a letter or letter sequence, then it's not standing alone anymore. So if we have an ellipsis and an unspaced word this, the ellipsis comes before the word this, so that means this is not standing alone. So we can't use the TH contraction to mean the word this in this situation. We can, however, use it to mean TH. So we have TH, IS. However, if that ellipsis comes after the word, then this is standing alone because there's a space in front of it, then the ellipsis, and a space after the ellipsis. So that whole sequence has a space on either side. Then it's still standing alone. If we have an ellipsis space, the word this, that of course is this is standing alone because there's a space on one side of it and a space on the other. So that is very much standing alone. The fourth and final example on this screen, this, unspaced ellipsis, unspaced 1, the word this is not standing alone. So because the ellipsis is coming after, but there isn't a space after it. There's the word 1. So the word this is not standing alone anymore. It has a space in front of it and a word after it. So in that case, we can use the TH to mean contraction to mean TH, but not the entire word this. Some more examples. We have do it yourself with hyphens. The D has a space on one side, hyphen on the other, so it's standing alone. So the D is read as the contraction for do. X has a hyphen on either side of it, so it's read as the contraction for it. And YRF has a hyphen on one side, space on the other, so it is read as the contraction or the short form for yourself. Out and out has the same deal, hyphens and spaces on either side of each of those words, so they are each standing alone. His child, this one, child, and this. Child has a space on one side, a dash on the other. This is just the opposite, it has a dash first and then a space on the other. Both of those words are standing alone. The next example has a long dash and then ST. A space, hyphen, or dash on either side of a Braille sign means it's standing alone. So if we use the ST contraction, .34, it would be read as the word still. We don't want it read as the word still. It means ST, so we need to spell out ST because there's a dash on one side of it and a space on the other. Can, remember a square bracket, an opening square bracket before a letter or letter sequence did not affect standing alone rule. So that C there is read as the word can because it has an opening square bracket in front of it, a space presumably in one side of that bracket, and the C also has a space on the other side of it, so it's standing alone. Same thing with a single quote and YR. YR has an opening quotation mark on one side of it and a space in front of that, space after the R, therefore YR is standing alone, and we read it as the contraction for your. If we had an opening transcriber's note, the contraction for IN is still standing alone because it's next to an open transcriber's note in front of it and a space on the other side. Same deal with quite and rather. We have opening, presumably a space, and then an opening square bracket, Q and a comma, and then a space. So the bracket and the comma do not affect the standing alone stats because there are spaces on either side of that entire sequence. The R has a closing square bracket after it, and so that it's standing alone as well. Okay, moving on to a new concept, modes. UEB makes a big deal of modes, and we've had modes all along. We just didn't necessarily call it that. So we have dots 1 and 2, for example. It can mean B. It can mean the word but if it's all by itself, standing alone. Or if we put a numeric indicator in front of it, then it's read as the number 2. So those same two dots mean different things depending on whether there's an indicator in front of it or not, and what kind of indicator is there if there is one. And that's all it is. That's all that modes are. It's just that UEB makes it more official. And UEB has primarily 5 different modes that we'll be talking about. We've already talked a little bit about grade 1 mode. We'll talk more later on in just a bit. And numeric mode has a numeric indicator in front of it. A new concept called line mode is in UEB. And then we have specific modes for shapes and arrows. So again, grade 1 mode versus grade 1 Braille. Grade 1 mode tells the reader that what follows is not to be read as a contraction or a number. Grade 1 mode occurs within contracted and uncontracted Braille. So grade 1 mode does not mean uncontracted Braille. Grade 1 mode can occur within uncontracted Braille. Grade 1 Braille is uncontracted Braille. Grade 2 Braille is contracted Braille. So let's talk about grade 1 mode. Grade 1 symbol indicator looks just like the letter indicator that we had before in the old code. It's dots 5, 6. But we called it a letter indicator in EBAE because it could only affect letters. The grade 1 symbol indicator in UEB has much more power than the letter indicator. So it is not a letter sign. It is a grade 1 symbol indicator. We also have a grade 1 word indicator, so that more than just the following Braille cell is affected, the next symbol, it's the entire sequence. So we have 2 cells then of dots 5, 6. A grade 1 passage indicator has 3 cells of dots 5, 6. This is making sense, isn't it? As I said, we have to terminate a passage at some point, otherwise it goes on indefinitely. And terminators are in UEB are always what's being terminated and then dot 3. Actually, there is an exception. I shouldn't say always, but for the most part, what most of us will have to deal with, it's always the what's being terminated and dot 3. So we have the grade 1 passage terminator there, and you'll see that same construction for other things as we go along. A grade 1 indicator, grade 1 symbol indicator, is used when a symbol could be misread as a contraction or a number. It is not required ever before the letters A, I, and O, because in the English language those are already words and can't be confused with anything else. So if we had a phrase that said the vowels are, A, E, I, O, U, A never gets a grade 1 indicator in front of it because it doesn't need one. E could be misread as the contraction for ever because it would have a space on one side, a comma that doesn't affect it, and a space on the other. So to make it be read as the letter E and not the word ever, we need a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it. I never needs an indicator, O never needs an indicator. We have the contraction for and, that stays the same. And then we have a grade 1 symbol indicator for U so that we're not reading us. The grade 1 symbol indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next symbol. So for initials, we will need grade 1 symbol indicators in front of them because otherwise they would be standing alone. They have a capital indicator in front of them and a period after them, spaces on either side. It's still standing alone unless we tell the reader that no, this is not the word just capitalized with a period after it. It is the letter J, so we need a grade 1 indicator in front of that. The same for S period and then back. Then we have what I think is an Italian phrase. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it has an E there in the middle of it, and so we don't want to read that as ever, and so we put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it. The next example is has a punctuation marks in front of it, or within it. It has a question mark and an exclamation point. The question mark, of course, could be misread as the contraction for his. We touched on that just a little while ago. We don't want it read as the contraction for his, so we put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it to say, don't read this as a contraction, read it as a symbol, which is the question mark. The exclamation point, however, can't be confused with anything else, and so that doesn't need anything in front of it. You'll notice that TO for 2 is uncontracted. The 2 contraction no longer exists in UEB. The next example, we have a dash with an S. So that would be a space hyphen a dash on either side of the S, which would make it standing alone, and we would read it as the word so. We don't want to read it as the word so we put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it to make sure that the reader understands that it's the letter S and not the word so. Dash ES, however, does not need anything because ES can't be mistaken for anything, so that's just a straightforward dash and ES. Then we have the last example on this screen, the letters A and A to G. A and G are in quotation marks. Quotation marks don't affect standing alone status as long as the opening one comes first and the closing one comes last. So the A would be standing alone, and again, A never needs a grade 1 mode indicator, so that's okay. And then, but G then has an opening quotation mark on the left, a closing quotation mark on the right. On either side of those things, there are spaces, so it would be read as the word go unless we put a grade 1 mode indicator in front of it. So that's grade 1 symbol indicator. We're now moving on to grade 1 word indicator. The grade 1 word indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next symbol sequence or the remainder of the current symbol sequence. The effect is terminated by a space, so we get to the end of the sequence, or by specifically saying the grade 1 mode has stopped. So the first example, a space is going to terminate it. I spell it U-N-T-I-D-Y. We could put grade 1 symbol indicators in front of U, N, T, D, and Y if we wanted to, but that's a lot of indicators. So we're going to just put a grade 1 word indicator in front of it, 2 cells of dots 5, 6, to say that this entire sequence until you hit a space is going to be in grade 1 mode. So don't read these as contractions, read these as straightforward letters. So I spell it grade 1 word indicator, U-N-T-I-D-Y. The next example, though, perishing, I have no idea how you pronounce it, that, with 7 different P's in front of 7 P's. Anyway, we have grade 1 word indicator. We don't want to put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of each of those P's. That would be very cumbersome. So we have a grade 1 word indicator, and that will go until we actually tell the reader that grade 1 mode stops. And we have that again with our terminator sign, what's being stopped, grade 1 mode, dots 5, 6, and then a dot 3 to say that mode has now terminated. With that termination, we can now use contractions for the full word perishing. The grade 1 passage indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next passage. And again, a passage is 3 or more symbol sequences. So a passage is, grade 1 passage indicator sets grade 1 mode for the next passage. And we have to terminate, always, we have to terminate passages. We terminate that with a grade 1 terminator. So we have, he spelled Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh is 3 symbol sequences. And so we're going to use a grade 1 passage indicator, 3 cells of dots 5, 6, meaning stay in grade 1 mode until we tell you to stop. So we've told the reader to stop after the H in Minh, and that is, again, is dots 5, 6, and then dot 3. Okay, let's put those two concepts together. for a bit, grade 1 mode and standing alone. Exude, it's letter for letter with hyphens in between. We just saw several examples of that. Grade 1 word indicator. Reader, read this entire thing as letters, not words, not as contractions, until you hit a space or we tell you to stop. So there's a space after the E, so that terminates grade 1 mode. 5-YRF-678, we don't want that read as the contraction for yourself, which it would be because there are hyphens on either side of it. So we want it read as YRF specifically, so we put a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it. Now the rule is that short forms, they call it in UEB, like yourself, only need the symbol indicator, not the word indicator in front of it. That's just the rule, and that's just the way it is. The next example, I like X, it works. I like X. That X has a space on one side, a dash on the other, so it would be standing alone, so we're putting a grade 1 symbol indicator in front of it to make sure that's read as X. The same deal, but the opposite result that we want with the other X. There's a dash on one side, a space on the other. It is standing alone. It will be read as the word it, and we want that, so we're leaving that alone. We're not putting a grade 1 indicator in front of that. Then we have some missing letters in the next example. Again, if we were to use TH, space, hyphen, or dash on either side of it would make that TH contraction stand alone. It would be read as the word this. We don't want that, so we have to spell out TH with then our 2 hyphens. And again, that R would be standing alone, hyphen on one side, space on the other. So we need a grade 1 indicator in front of that. Then we can have Madame, I think is the abbreviation for that, an M and a dash. The M would be standing alone, space on one side, long dash on the other. So we need that grade 1 indicator there because otherwise it's standing alone. It would be read as the word more. The next example, hyphen S, like if you're adding an S to a word, making it plural. Again, that S is standing alone because it has a dash on one side, space on the other, so we need a grade 1 symbol indicator. Same deal, we saw already some examples with C and the word can and quite and rather. So these next examples show that if we want those read as letters, we need those grade 1 symbol indicators in front of those letters, otherwise they'll be read as words. Okay, the last concept for this video is numeric mode. So the following symbols in UEB do not terminate numeric mode. The 10 digits, of course, 10 digits are numbers, so we want those to stay in numeric mode. Numbers often have decimal points and commas, and so we don't want numeric mode to end with those things. A simple numeric fraction line, we'll talk later on about simple versus general fractions, but a simple numeric fraction line. And then something new called a numeric space, and another new thing called a line continuation indicator. So this list of 6 things are the only things that numeric mode will carry through. Anything else will terminate it. So here are a bunch of examples that show that. Times, for instance, will be a little different in UEB because of the colon. The colon was not one of those things listed on that list, and so it actually terminates numeric mode, which means we have to start it up again for the minutes. So we have the hour, 7, and then a colon. Numeric mode is now terminated. We need to start it up again with another numeric mode indicator, and then the minutes 30. Then we have 9 to 10 for the next example. A hyphen was not on that list of 6 things, so a hyphen will terminate numeric mode. So we have to start it up again after the hyphen. That's the opposite of what we did in EBAE. The hyphen did not terminate numeric mode in EBAE, the old code. The next example is also the opposite then because of this whole hyphen situation. 8 hyphen, numeric mode is now stopped, so what comes after it, CAB, are read as the letter CAB. In the old code, the hyphen didn't stop, I'll call it numeric mode, that's not what we called it in that code, but it didn't stop the numeric effect. And so it would have been read as 312. But in UEB, it's just the opposite. Hyphens terminate numeric mode. So We need a numeric indicator where we didn't before, and we don't need a numeric indicator where we did before, interestingly enough, or where we needed a letter sign before. So an 8-cab fleet is how that is read. Then we have 1/4 cup. Obviously, to us as human beings, we know that's 1/4, but again, a computer wouldn't know that, and for all we know, it might not be 1/4. Who knows? I can't imagine a situation like that, but you never know. So we have the numeric mode indicator .1 to mean the number 1, a slash, which has stayed the same in UEB, thank goodness, and then we need to start up numeric mode again for the 4. And that's just how it was in the old code the last few years. And then we have on-call 24/7. Again, that's not a fraction. Obviously, that's not 24/7. It's 2 numbers separated by a slash, and so that's why UEB has this rule. So we have numeric mode indicator 24 slash. We have to start up numeric mode again with an indicator, and then 7. The last 2 examples have to do again with standing alone, numeric mode, and all of that together. So we have 7, a parenthesis, which terminates numeric mode. So we have to start it up again if we want that dot configuration of 1, 2 to be read as the number 2. And then we have the closing parenthesis. The final example, however, we want that read as B. So we have a parenthesis. Numeric mode is now stopped, so now whatever comes after it is not read as a number anymore. So we have B and a parenthesis. Now notice that if there was a space between the 7 and that left-hand parenthesis, we would need a grade 1 mode indicator in there because the B would be standing alone. But since there's that 7 directly in front of the parenthesis, then it's not standing alone anymore, so the B is just fine standing by itself. Now here's the tricky part. Numeric mode also starts up grade 1 mode. So we have 2 different modes starting at the same time. A numeric indicator also sets grade 1 mode. Grade 1 mode set by a numeric indicator is terminated by the space hyphen or dash, or also a grade 1 terminator. So that means while grade 1 mode is in effect, meaning it started with a numeric indicator, contractions may not follow a number because you're in grade 1 mode. That means that we're not going to use the ST contraction or the TH contraction in ordinal numbers like first and fourth. Or if we have houses for lease, where the word for is substituted with the number for, we have houses, just normal. Then we have the numeric mode indicator for, and then we have the word lease, and we cannot use the EA contraction in that while we're in grade 1 mode started by the numeric mode indicator. That's important, especially when we get to computer addresses. Some more examples of showing how this all works together. A grade 1 indicator is not required unless a lowercase letter A through J follows a digit, period, or comma, because numeric mode carries through digits, periods, and commas, and because the same dot configurations for lowercase letters A through J look like numbers. So that's why we need grade 1 indicators for those things, but not for anything else. So we have the number 32, that's clear enough. Moving down that column, we have 3B. And of course, it's fairly obvious to us that if we didn't have that grade 1 symbol indicator in front of the dots 1, 2, we would read that as 2 just as we did before, but we want that read as B, so we put the grade 1 mode symbol indicator in front of it, and now we read it as 3B. 3 capital B, however, the capital indicator can't be mistaken for anything, so that terminates numeric mode. So we have 3 capital B, and we do not need a grade 1 symbol indicator for that capital B there. 3M, M cannot, it's not one of those lowercase letters A through J. It can't be mistaken for a number, so we do not need a grade 1 mode symbol indicator in front of the M. Moving to the next column, we have 4.2. The point there, the decimal point, or the period as UEB calls it, the numeric mode carries through that, and so we read it as 4.2. But if we want it read as 4.B, that decimal point does not terminate numeric mode, so we need to actually terminate it with the grade 1 indicator in front of there. So we read it as B and not the number 2. The next example for decimal point capital B, again, capital indicator is not on that list of things that numeric mode carries through. So the capital indicator terminates numeric mode. We do not need a grade 1 mode symbol indicator in front of the capital B. And for point M, M can't be mistaken for anything, so we don't need a grade 1 indicator there. Okay, as promised, we have a new thing called a numeric space indicator. When a number has different segments and with spaces in between, we're going to represent that space with a .5 instead of using another numeric indicator. So we have, say, an ISBN number, which is often segmented with spaces in between, and it's all one number. So we're going to use .5 to represent those spaces. If those were some different numbers, if it was 978 and then the number 1 and so on, then that's not one number anymore, and so we would need the numeric mode indicator in front of each of those numbers. But this is one number, just segmented, and so we're using the numeric space indicator. The same deal for a phone number, especially in other countries besides the United States. They might just use spaces in between a phone number, and so we would use the numeric space indicator there. We follow print for dates, time, coinage, ordinal numbers, postal codes, or telephone numbers. So when you see a number, you just follow print. If we have a date, 7/11/59, slashes terminate numeric mode, so we need to start up the numeric mode indicator after each slash. A period, however, does not terminate numeric mode, so we don't need to start up numeric mode indicate again. So we just carry that whole date through with one numeric indicator. If we have omitted digits like years, like decades, 70s, and 80s, before we would have a numeric mode indicator, a number indicator, I think we called it, and then the apostrophe, because the apostrophe represented missing numbers. But in UEB, an apostrophe is not on that list of things that numeric mode carries through. And so if we put it after the numeric mode indicator, we would start numeric mode and immediately terminate it with the apostrophe. We don't want that, of course, so we're putting the apostrophe first. And that is just like Nemeth, for you Nemeth transcribers out there. Apostrophe, then the numeric mode starts up, 70s, S can't be mistaken for anything, so we don't need a grade 1 indicator there. And the same thing for 80s. If we have something like Canadian, or maybe other countries use postal codes like this, where we have letters and numbers mixed up together. The M is not standing alone because it has space on one side and a numeric indicator on the other. So that's okay, we don't need a grade 1 indicator in front of that. Numeric mode for the number 4, capital G, capital terminates numeric mode, so we don't need a numeric or grade 1 mode indicator there. And then we have the number 3, numeric mode starts, capital E, we don't, even though it's E, it's capital, so we don't need a grade 1 indicator there. And then we start up numeric mode again for 8. So notice the last example, we have an ISBN number with hyphens. Before we had an example of an ISBN number with spaces, and we use the numeric space indicator. But if there are hyphens in between, the hyphen terminates numeric mode, so we need to start it up again with each segment. And also notice that the X at the end would be standing alone, or is standing alone, so that because it has a hyphen on one side, a space on the other, and so we need to put a grade 1 symbol indicator there to make it read X and not the word it. Numeric passage indicator, this is an instance of me showing you what to do in order to tell you not to use it, if that makes any sense. So the numeric passage indicator, I just want you to be aware of its existence, so that if you're flipping through the code book, you don't think, oh look, a numeric passage indicator, I should be using that. Numeric passage indicator uses two cells of dots 3, 4, 5, 6, and is terminated with what's being terminated, dots 3, 4, 5, 6, and the dot 3 to terminate it. Numeric indicators are not used when we are in numeric passage mode, and any lowercase letter A through J is preceded by a grade 1 indicator, because now it would be read as digits, not as letters. So if you need it to be read as letters, you need the grade 1 indicator in front of it. All of that said, we're only going to use the numeric passage indicator very rarely in non-technical context. A possibility might be a table with a bunch of numbers in it. But we're not going to use it for, say, the printing history or the ISBN numbers on a title page. So we are only going to use numeric mode if we're using UEB math, or possibly if there's a long table of numbers in a non-technical work. But we're not going to be using it all over the place just because there happens to be a sequence of 3 or more numbers. We're not going to be using that in that way. When dividing long numbers, use the one-cell line continuation indicator, which is .5. As I said, UEB is fond of very long labels for things. So that .5 we put at the end of the line to say that the number is continuing onto the next line. Since we've already told the Braille reader that it's a number and it's continuing, we don't need a numeric indicator on the next line or lines. So we have whatever this is. I think maybe it's a Google, the actual number of a Google. I can't remember where I got that from, but it has a 1 followed by a whole bunch of zeros. It can't fit on one Braille line, so I have 1, 0, 0, comma, 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 comma. At the end of the line, I have a one-cell line continuation indicator, which is a .5. The number continues on the next line. Suppose, however, that you have spaces in between those segments and not commas. Spaces, remember, a numeric space is represented by a .5, and now we've just learned that the line continuation indicator is also a .5. But that is okay. It's not confusing. We're going to use what UEB calls the two-cell line continuation indicator. In my mind, it's 1.5 represents a space and 1.5 represents the line continuation that the number is continuing. You're welcome to think of it that way, but UEB, just for the record, tends to think of things in units, and so they're calling both of those things together a two-cell line continuation indicator. So we have a long segmented number with spaces in between each segment. We use .5 for the numeric spaces. Then we get to the end of the line as far as we can go at a logical point, so we're breaking it at a space, not in the middle of a sequence of zeros. So a segment of zeros, I mean. So we're breaking it and telling the reader that the number is continuing. We don't need the numeric indicator on the next line. We can use a spaced numeric indicator if we're going to align digits vertically. Again, this is not what we would be using in Nemeth. Nemeth has its own rules for this sort of thing. This is for those areas that are using UEB math, or if you would find yourself using this in a non-technical context, say a receipt in a mystery novel or something like that. You might use it in that context. So we can space the digits away from the numeric indicators if need be in order to align them vertically. And there you have it. As I said, it was a very long session. Thank you for sticking with it. Go ahead and see if you can figure out the first practice exercise. The answers are also available for you to check your work. I hope you'll come back for session 2 and see you then. Thanks.